This cowboy lost his family to fire. Now he rides with only silence and names. The cabin was already burning when John Kessler reached the ridge. At first he thought the red glow in the distance was the sun dipping below the horizon, but the wind carried something more sinister than the scent of dusk. It carried smoke. It carried the scent of pine and flesh, wood and sorrow, something that didn't belong to the sky or the mountains. It belonged to hell. John's horse, Grey Dust, whinnied in distress as they crested the last hill overlooking the homestead. Flames devoured the roof, reaching up like a dozen red serpents trying to touch the stars. The barn was already gone, just a skeleton of beams. And the corral was open, no horses in sight. He couldn't see them, he couldn't see anything but fire. "Mary!" he shouted, and the sound cracked in his throat like an old gun misfiring. His boots hit the dirt before the horse had fully stopped, and he stumbled down the hill. His rifle clanged against his back, forgotten. The heat hit him like a wall. He could barely breathe. "Thomas! Ellie!" he screamed again, louder this time. But the only answer was the roar of burning timber and the occasional horrifying pop of what might have been furniture, or something worse. He reached the porch, what was left of it, and was about to kick the door when it collapsed inward. The floor gave way and the interior glowed with molten orange fury. There was no way inside, not anymore. He stood there, breathing the smoke like punishment, as the fire consumed everything he'd ever built: his wife, his son, his daughter. The 3 reasons he'd put down his gun and picked up a hammer, gone. Neighbors appeared too late, silhouettes watching from a safe distance, whispering with faces half lit by the blaze. No one approached, not even to place a comforting hand on his shoulder. Sheriff Doyle arrived last, riding slow, like a man showing up out of obligation. He didn't dismount, just stared with hollow eyes and said something like, "It's too late, John." Too late? John didn't respond. He didn't even look at the sheriff. His eyes were fixed on the ruins, on the firelight dancing in the ashes, where Ellie's doll collection used to sit on the windowsill, where Thomas used to carve wood figures by the hearth, where Mary would hum as she folded linens. A neighbor, Pastor Abel, finally stepped close and touched his arm. "There's nothing you could have done, son." John pulled away slowly and walked to the well. He sat on the stone edge and didn't move for hours, long after the flames had shriveled into red coals. No tears came, just silence. When morning broke, the world was grey. Soot rained lightly across the valley like morning snow. He entered what remained of the barn, scavenged through charred debris, and found Mary's wedding ring, bent, blackened, but still a circle. He wrapped it in cloth and put it in his pocket. That evening, inside the old tool shed that had survived the fire, he pulled out his war kit, a tin box holding oil, cleaning rags, and a Colt Walker revolver he hadn't touched in years. His hands moved with the precision of muscle memory. Wipe, load, check the sights. Not a single word escaped his lips. Next came the hat. It was the same worn Stetson he'd worn since his military days. Inside the inner band, where sweat had long since stained the leather, he began to stitch. 3 names. Carefully, painfully. He pricked his fingers more than once but didn't flinch. Mary, Thomas, Ellie. He stitched each one in thread the color of dried blood. Then, underneath those, he took a separate scrap of tanned leather and wrote 4 more names. These weren't names of the dead. These were names of the damned. Elijah Lockridge, Jonas Vale, Hank Turley, Silas Boone. He didn't need proof. He didn't need a trial. He'd fought beside Lockridge in the war, had seen his appetite for destruction and domination firsthand. Lockridge had always been a man who took what he wanted and set fire to what he couldn't own. Earlier that month, Lockridge had tried to purchase John's land. The offer came with veiled threats. "You're just sitting on it. We could make something of it." John declined, firmly. Mary asked him afterward if he thought there'd be trouble. He said no. He was wrong. They didn't just burn the house. They made sure the family was inside. And now, John had no voice left for prayers, no time for trials, only silence. and names. That night he saddled up Grey Dust and rode out without saying goodbye. The neighbors watched him go. They didn't wave. Some turned away in shame. He passed the sheriff's office and dropped something on the steps. A single bullet with a strip of paper tied around it. On the paper, a line of inked letters that simply read, "Tick, tick." Then he disappeared into the horizon, hat pulled low, coat flapping behind him like wings of shadow, a storm building in his heart. 2 weeks passed. Not a soul saw him. Rumors began to crawl like snakes through the saloons and feed stores of Dry Creek. Some said John Kessler had taken his own life in the mountains. Others whispered that he'd joined a gang down near the border, trading grief for blood. But the ones who'd seen the look in his eyes that night, the ones who saw the man who watched his whole world burn, knew better. They knew he wasn't dead. He was sharpening. And then, one morning, just as the town bell rang 8, he rode in. No fanfare, no speech. Just a man in black with dust on his coat, leather cracked from sun and sorrow, and a revolver tied low on his hip. His beard had grown out, rough and grey along the edges. The brim of his hat shaded most of his face, but not enough to hide the scars, some old, some fresh. His eyes no longer searched the world. They drilled through it. The town square froze. Men who'd once shared a drink with him stopped mid-step. Women carrying baskets to the general store instinctively pulled their children close. Even the dogs lowered their heads and backed away. Something walked with John Kessler that day. Something invisible but unmistakable. Not a demon, not a ghost. Just silence. Heavy, bitter silence. He didn't acknowledge anyone, not even the old butcher Tompkins who once helped deliver Ellie. Kessler passed the saloon without a glance. When he reached the sheriff's office, he dismounted slowly. His boots hit the ground like gongs. He tied his horse, adjusted his coat, and walked inside. Sheriff Doyle looked up from behind his desk, startled. He had a pencil in one hand and a ledger in the other. His badge gleamed under the lamplight, but his face didn't. It was pale, the kind of pale that knew what had come through the door, wasn't there to chat. "Kessler," Doyle cleared his throat. "Didn't expect to see you so soon." John said nothing. He stood there, expression unreadable. Doyle shifted in his chair. "I was meaning to come by, you know. Pay my respects, I just—" Still nothing. John reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He placed it gently on the sheriff's desk. The sheriff unfolded it with hesitant fingers. His mouth moved slightly as he read. One name, Silas Boone. Just the name. And under it, a date, June 14th, tomorrow. "What the hell is this?" Doyle asked. John didn't answer. Instead, he turned around and walked out as quietly as he had entered. Doyle stood, his voice rising. "You planning something stupid, John? You think I'll just let you turn this town into your graveyard?" No response. "You come back here and talk to me, damn it." But John had already mounted his horse. The sheriff stared out the window as the cowboy rode toward the far end of town, toward the hills where the wind whispered and the soil still held ashes. Later that day, Doyle summoned Deputy Malley. "Ride to the Boone Ranch. Tell Silas to get the hell out of Dodge, now." But by the time the deputy reached the ranch, Silas was already gone. Packed his bags the moment he heard John was back. He didn't leave a note, didn't even take his horse, just one of Elijah Lockridge's wagons and a bottle of rye. Back in town, the tension grew like a kettle over flame. People talked in whispers. Some wanted the sheriff to arrest John. Others said let him be. He'd lost everything. If he wanted vengeance, maybe it was owed. But vengeance wasn't the word they used in front of him. The next morning, before the sun broke fully over the mesas, a child spotted something at the foot of the town statue. A hat box. Inside it, a pair of boots, a belt buckle with the initials SB, and a red playing card with blood smeared across the back. Silas Boone was gone. No one saw him leave. No one saw John do anything. But folks began to understand. This wasn't revenge. It was a ritual. John rented a room at the edge of town, in the old blacksmith's shed. No one questioned it. He slept there, sharpened his blade in silence, and stitched another name under the brim of his hat. This one not of family, but of judgment. He added tick beneath the list. At dusk, he sat outside on a broken crate, coat open just enough to reveal the silver handle of the Colt Walker. He watched people pass. No smile, no nod, no words. A young boy once tried to ask him a question, something innocent about horses. The mother yanked the child away before he could finish. The town had its sheriff. It had its laws. But now it also had John Kessler, and justice, it seemed, had changed hands. By nightfall, another paper was pinned to the saloon's front door. A single name, Hank Turley, and a date, June 19th. Dry Creek had seen its share of drifters, killers, and men with blood in their eyes, but none had ever made the town quieter than John Kessler. His silence wasn't the silence of a stranger. It was the silence of someone everyone had known, someone who used to laugh during barn dances, who offered his tools when a neighbor's fence fell, who brought fresh eggs into town every Tuesday with his daughter riding in the back of the wagon. That silence now sat like a shadow in every room, heavy and cold, and the town, in its guilt, tried to act like nothing had changed. The general store opened on time. The blacksmith kept hammering iron. Mrs. Lacey still swept her porch each morning. But behind every pair of eyes was the same fear. Who was next? When the paper with Hank Turley's name appeared, no one touched it. They didn't remove it. They didn't even try to cover it. It hung there like a tombstone, fluttering softly in the summer wind. Hank, for his part, wasn't as subtle as Silas Boone. He stormed into the sheriff's office the moment he heard about it. "You gonna stop him or what?" Hank bellowed, slamming his fist on the desk. Sheriff Doyle looked up from his whiskey glass. He hadn't shaved in 3 days. "Stop who?" "Don't play dumb with me, Doyle. Kessler's out for blood. Silas is gone, dead for all we know, and now I'm next." The sheriff sighed. "You know I can't arrest a man for posting a piece of paper." Hank's face turned red. "You know what this is? It ain't no damn poetry contest. He's gunning for us, me, you, everyone who looked the other way." The room fell into a heavy pause. "I warned you," Doyle said quietly. "When Elijah set his sights on Kessler's land, I told you to stay out of it. I told all of you. But you helped him. You and Jonas. You pushed him, cornered him, and now he's cornered you." Hank leaned in close. "You think that makes it fair? We were just—" The sheriff's glare stopped him cold. "You burned a man's family. There's no fairness coming." That night, Hank left town, loaded 2 pistols, packed a bag, and rode east. But he didn't get far. The next morning, a ranch hand from Greystone Ridge found his horse wandering the trail alone, saddle intact, no rider. A few hours later, just outside the old church ruins, they found Hank, face down, not shot, not stabbed, just dead. His lips were blue. A small burlap pouch sat next to him, tied with twine. Inside, 3 river stones and a folded note. He let the fire start. He watched. Nobody dared touch the body for hours. The pastor eventually came and said a prayer, but nobody stayed long. Not even the undertaker. John didn't appear that day. But when the town bell rang noon, another note appeared, this time nailed to the church door. Jonas Vale, June 23rd. Panic bloomed. Jonas was different. He wasn't just a follower of Elijah Lockridge. He was blood, cousin, business partner, and the muscle behind Lockridge's ranching empire. The kind of man who settled arguments with a shovel handle. He'd been in the background for years, always half in shadow. Folks whispered he once drowned a boy for stealing a chicken. No charges were filed. The boy's mother moved away. No one asked questions. Now, questions were everywhere. Jonas didn't run. He fortified, sent for 2 men from the Lockridge spread, hard-eyed cowhands with itchy fingers, barricaded himself inside the old train station building, turned it into a bunker. 3 rifles on the windows, 1 on the roof, a barrel of water, ammunition stacked like firewood. He even posted a sign, "Come get me, ghost." But John didn't come right away. He stayed out of sight. Some said he was sleeping in the canyons by Widow's Ridge. Others said they saw him standing by the burned ruins of his house, whispering to the wind. A few children claimed they spotted him riding at dusk, scribbling something in a small book. Whatever the truth, the days passed slowly. Jonas didn't sleep. His men took shifts, watching every road into town. But no one came. Until the fourth night, a noise like thunder cracked through the town. One of Jonas's guards fired wildly from the roof. People jumped from their beds, scrambling in the dark. When the sheriff arrived with his lantern, the scene was chaos. The roof guard was missing. The others said he was there 1 second, gone the next. Blood on the shingles. No body. Jonas raged, shouted into the dark, daring Kessler to face him. But there was no answer until morning. A boot print in the dirt outside the back door and a bullet casing with the initials MEK, Mary Elizabeth Kessler. Jonas didn't come out all day. That afternoon, 3 children playing near the rail tracks found a broken shovel handle planted upright in the soil like a grave marker carved into the wood. "You buried my son. I bury your name." Jonas finally cracked. He tried to ride for Lockridge's estate but never made it to the stables. That night, the town awoke to fire. Not a house, not a church, the sheriff's office. No one was inside when it burned, no injuries, no bodies, but outside the smoldering ruins, a final note hung from a nail. This town watched. It said nothing. It will remember. The sun never really rose over Dry Creek the next morning. A thick curtain of ash hung in the air, dimming the sky like grief made physical. The sheriff's office, once the center of the town's law, still smoldered. Its windows blackened, its walls curled inward like a dying man's hands. The sign that once read "Justice" now lay half-buried in soot and broken glass. And Jonas Vale was gone. He hadn't stayed to fight, hadn't even waited to see the ruins. He left under the cover of smoke and confusion, just before dawn, taking with him the last 2 men loyal enough, or stupid enough, to follow him. They rode east through the high country, believing that the narrow canyons and rocky passes would be enough to lose whoever or whatever was following them. But John Kessler had once hunted Confederates in the swamps of Louisiana. He'd tracked men who buried their footprints and bled quietly. He knew the rhythm of fear. He knew the signs of a man running, not towards something, but away. By the second night, Jonas's men were dead. One tried to leave during a rest. They found him the next morning, hanging upside down from an aspen tree with a strip of leather over his mouth, stitched shut. The second died after stepping into a bear trap that hadn't been there an hour before. The trap was old, rusted, almost ceremonial, laid out like a message, and Jonas, he kept riding. His horse foamed and limped. He ditched his saddle and gear, hoping less weight would buy him time. But by the third night, time stopped buying. He reached the old logging site beyond Hollow Creek, a place abandoned since the mine collapse years back. The ruins of cabins and rusted tools stretched like broken bones across the clearing. Jonas crouched behind an old wagon, breath ragged, eyes wild. He clutched his rifle but didn't aim it. He couldn't. His hands shook too much. The moon hung low and red, casting blood-colored shadows across the grass. Wind blew through the pines with a whisper, like someone murmuring names over and over again. And then, nothing. Silence. That awful, suffocating silence. Jonas turned, and John Kessler was standing there. No sound, no warning, just the man, dressed in black, standing 5 paces away. Jonas tried to raise his rifle, but his body refused. His knees buckled instead, and he fell backward into the dirt. "I didn't start the fire," he gasped. "I wasn't even. Elijah made the call. I swear it, I swear." John didn't speak. He walked forward slowly, revolver hanging loose in his right hand. His left hand reached inside his coat and pulled out something small, the piece of tanned leather, now with one name already crossed. Silas Boone, a line drawn through the letters. Jonas's eyes fixed on the leather like it held the power of heaven and hell. "You don't understand," he pleaded, crawling backward over gravel and twigs. "I didn't know they were inside. We were just trying to scare you off the land, that's all. It wasn't meant to happen like that." John crouched beside him, still silent. He held out the piece of leather, slowly, like a priest offering confession. Then he removed a small iron nail from his pocket. It was old, scorched at the tip. Jonas screamed when John drove the nail through his hand, pinning it to the rotting wood beneath them. It wasn't a fatal move. It wasn't even meant to be. It was ritual, a warning to the next, a moment to let a man feel what silence tastes like. "I'm sorry," Jonas sobbed. "I swear I'm sorry." John finally spoke. 3 words, only 3. "You buried Thomas." Jonas froze. And then, like a dam breaking, he began to cry. He was just a boy. We didn't mean..." He ran back inside when the fire started. "We thought he was with you. We thought..." John didn't react. He simply stood, raised his Colt Walker, and aimed between Jonas's eyes. "No!" Jonas shrieked. "I told you what happened. I'm not the one you want." The hammer clicked back, and John said, "I know." The shot echoed through the canyon, scattering crows into the red-lit sky. By morning, Jonas's body was found by a pair of loggers headed north. Pinned to the chest of his coat was a page torn from a Bible. The verse was circled in black ash. "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord." But beneath that someone had scribbled, "Not anymore." In Dry Creek, Sheriff Doyle heard the news with hollow eyes. That same afternoon, the town awoke to a new name. Posted outside the chapel, nailed with the same iron spike that had pierced Jonas's hand, was a single word: Elijah. No last name, no date, just that. And everyone knew what it meant. John was done with the dogs. He was going for the king. By the time Elijah Lockridge received word of Jonas Vale's death, the whiskey in his hand went untouched. He sat in his study, surrounded by oil lamps and heavy red drapes, staring at the telegram like it had insulted him personally. His empire was built on 2 things: fear and fire. And yet, one broken man, one ghost in black, was unraveling it faster than drought in summer. He set the glass down. "Bring them," he said. Within the hour, his butler had dispatched riders to the border. By dusk the next day, 3 men had arrived at the Lockridge estate. Not hired hands, not deputies, killers, bounty hunters. Each of them came with a price on their own heads in more than one territory, but Elijah didn't care. He paid in gold. He wanted John Kessler's body, not for justice, not even for protection. He wanted it so he could stare into the dead eyes of the man who had dared to bring silence to his kingdom. "Dead only," Elijah said. "I want him silent forever." John knew they were coming. He felt it before he saw them. 3 riders, one older, long moustache with a dented hat and a scar along his jaw. One was lean, twitchy, always chewing tobacco and clicking his fingers like he was impatient with time itself. The third was quiet, too quiet, even for John's standards. He rode with a black bandana over his face and a rifle strapped across his back. They entered Dry Creek on a Thursday, pretending to be merchants. No one bought it. People knew a hunter when they saw one. And these 3 didn't ask for whiskey or women. They asked for John Kessler. Sheriff Doyle watched from the saloon window and muttered under his breath, "This town's gonna bleed before it's clean." John wasn't in town when they came. He was 30 miles south, sleeping under an old cottonwood tree with his hat pulled low and his gun wrapped in oilcloth beside him. He hadn't eaten in 2 days, not out of necessity, out of discipline. Hunger made his mind sharper. Fear made it precise. He heard the hoofbeats before he saw the dust cloud, didn't move, didn't blink. He waited. The twitchy one rode ahead first, grinning like a drunk gambler. He spotted John's campfire, burned out, still warm, and signaled to the others. "We got tracks," he said. "Boots with a limp, heavy step." The older one nodded. "Kessler's horse has a notch in its left hoof. Look for uneven prints." They found it within the hour, but John was ready. He'd spent the last day setting up the terrain. Nothing elaborate, just enough to funnel them into the low gully where the trees narrowed and the sunlight vanished by noon. He waited at the top ridge with a borrowed Sharp's rifle and 3 bullets. 3 names. The first shot didn't kill. It didn't need to. It spooked the horses. The twitchy one fell sideways into a thorn bush, his pistol firing into the dirt. He scrambled to get up, but a second shot pinned the saddle next to his face. The message was clear. "You're being hunted now." The older one dismounted and crouched behind a boulder, scanning the ridge. "John Kessler!" he shouted. "You ain't the only one with names to cross, boy." John didn't answer. He moved like smoke between the trees, closing the distance. Within minutes, the third bounty hunter, the quiet one, was alone. He reached for his rifle, only to find the strap sliced clean. John stepped behind him, pressing the cold barrel of his revolver to the man's neck. "I don't shoot men in the back," John said. The man turned, startled. "But I do let 'em run," John continued, "if you tell Lockridge what's coming." The man didn't hesitate. He dropped his gun and bolted. By sunset, the older bounty hunter was dead, shot once through the chest, buried beneath a cairn of rocks. The twitchy one had vanished into the desert, shoes stolen by John to slow him down. He wouldn't last 2 nights in the heat. And John? He didn't celebrate. He didn't speak. He took the bullet casing from the rifle, etched a small mark into the base, and added it to the pouch beneath his coat. One more step closer. That night, he reached the small homestead of Widow Esperanza, a woman whose late husband had fought beside him in the war. She offered him food, a cot, and a place to clean his wounds. He refused the cot, but accepted the coffee. "You look like death with a memory," she said, watching him from across the fire. John didn't reply. She poured more coffee. "They're calling you the silent rider now. The one who doesn't speak but leaves notes and names. That true?" John stared into the fire, the shadows dancing in his eyes. She leaned forward. "Do you even know who you'll be when it's over?" John looked up. For the first time that day, he spoke. "I'll be done." 3 days later, a poster appeared in Dry Creek, nailed to the same wall that once held town fair flyers and missing mule notices. Not a name this time, a drawing. Lockridge Estate, drawn in charcoal, precise, with a red X over the front gate, and beneath it, carved into the wall itself, with a knife. Tick, tick. The countdown had begun. The Lockridge Estate wasn't just a home, it was a fortress. Perched on a hill surrounded by jagged pines and iron fencing, it loomed like a monument to arrogance and old money. 3 stories of stone and dark timber, with turrets built more for intimidation than defense. Lanterns hung from iron brackets along the walls, casting orange halos that flickered against the evening fog. No one in Dry Creek could remember who built it, only that Elijah Lockridge had made it his long before the war ended. John Kessler watched from the tree line, crouched behind a fallen log. His eyes scanned the guards, 4 that he could see. 2 at the gate, 1 on the east balcony, 1 with a lantern, walking the grounds in slow, lazy circles. Their rifles glinted in the lamplight. But they weren't soldiers. They were hired men, paid loyalty, the kind that melted in the face of real conviction. John waited. He let the night grow thick, let the sounds of frogs and wind lull the guards into routine. He moved low, sliding down the embankment toward the north fence. A tree had fallen there months ago, and the weight of the trunk had bent the bars just enough for a man to squeeze through. He timed his breath with the wind. He didn't think of the past. Not yet. He had to stay sharp. Inside the perimeter, he crouched behind the stone garden wall, just yards from the back door of the estate. He pulled the small slip of leather from his coat pocket. 3 names had been crossed. Silas Boone, Jonas Vale, Hank Turley. Only one remained before Elijah. Rayford. The name wasn't written in ink, but carved, etched with the point of a blade into the hide. Rayford Powell, Elijah's foreman. The man who'd poured the kerosene, according to the whispers. The man who'd watched from the tree line with a cigarette in his mouth while the house burned. John moved like a shadow across the back patio, avoiding the light. The door wasn't locked. It never occurred to men like Elijah that danger might enter through the servant's wing. The interior of the house was warm, polished, dead. Antlers on the walls, chandeliers that shimmered with crystal and oil flame, rugs imported from the east. A room filled with books whose spines had never been cracked open. Elijah didn't read. He conquered. John knew the layout. He had helped build part of it, back before he settled, back when Elijah offered work during reconstruction, before the land offers turned to threats. He passed through the billiard room, hearing the soft murmur of a phonograph somewhere upstairs. Then he heard laughter, rough, slurred, Rayford. He followed the sound to the west wing, a parlor used for drinking and card games. The door was half open. Inside, Rayford Powell sat alone at a circular table, playing solitaire with a bottle of rye. His boots were on the table, his shirt stained with sweat and something darker. "I know you're there," he said suddenly. John paused. Rayford didn't turn, just sipped his drink. "I've been dreaming of this moment," Rayford muttered. "You, coming back from the ashes, riding all quiet like some ghost with a ledger. Folks talk, you know. They say you're keeping names, crossing them out like sins on a prayer list." John stepped inside. He said nothing. Rayford finally looked up and grinned. "You think you're justice, John? You ain't justice. You're just another man with a broken heart and a gun." John kept walking. Rayford's grin faltered. "They was just kids, I get it," he continued, voice rising. "But they were in the way. And Mary, that wasn't supposed to happen. Hell, I didn't even know she was home. We thought—" John drew his revolver so fast, the room went still. But he didn't raise it. Not yet. Rayford reached slowly into his pocket. "You'll want to see this," he said. John didn't stop him. Something in his gut said to wait. Rayford pulled out a folded paper, tossed it on the table. John picked it up. It was a list, a payment ledger, names of men from Dry Creek, townsfolk, the same ones who stood silent while the fire burned. Their names beside dollar amounts. Lockridge had bought them all. Rayford grinned again. "You think Elijah's the end? He's just the face. The soul of this whole county's been rotted for years. You kill him and another'll wear his coat. But me, I was there. I struck the match. I laughed when it lit. I deserve it." John stared at him, and for the first time in years, he trembled, not with fear, with fury. Rayford saw it, and he knew. He tried to stand, but the shot came fast, clean right through the heart. Rayford staggered back, crashed through a chair, and hit the floor with a thud. John stepped over the body, took the blood-streaked ledger, and tucked it into his coat. Then he knelt beside the corpse and whispered one word: "Ellie." Outside, thunder rolled. The storm that had threatened for days finally broke. Rain began to fall, hissing on the lanterns, pattering on the stone like war drums. John made his exit the way he came, quiet, precise. The guards never saw him. The wind covered his tracks. By morning, Rayford Powell's body was discovered by a servant girl. The blood had dried into the shape of an arrow, pointing toward the east window. On the glass pane, written in ash, one left, and next to it, etched with a blade, E.L. Elijah Lockridge. The second name was done, and the final reckoning was coming. The rain hadn't stopped. It soaked Dry Creek's dirt roads until they turned to rivers of mud, and it washed the blood from Rayford Powell's parlor floor before the undertaker could even arrive. It rolled down the cracked statue in the town square, dripping like tears from stone eyes, and somewhere on the edge of town, John Kessler sat beneath the eaves of an abandoned barn, sharpening his knife in rhythm with the storm. He was one name away. One. And yet he didn't ride immediately, because something was different now. Something had shifted when he read that ledger, the one Rayford tossed at him before he died. It wasn't just Lockridge behind the fire, it was the town. The men who called themselves neighbors, the preacher who blessed the wedding, the blacksmith who once carved Ellie a wooden horse. They had taken Lockridge's money, some to look the other way, others to lie under oath. The truth was worse than fire. It was betrayal. Still, the road led to Elijah, and it was on that road that John met her. He was riding south past the old Mill Creek when he saw a figure in black standing alone beneath a crooked pine. The woman didn't flinch when he approached. She didn't move at all, just watched him come like she'd been expecting it. Her dress was plain, but not poor. A heavy shawl covered her shoulders, and her face was hidden beneath the brim of a mourning bonnet. But her eyes cut sharper than any blade John had ever held. Eyes that had seen death and dared it to take her too. "You're late," she said, before he could even speak. John narrowed his eyes. "I've been waiting," she added, then slowly pulled off the bonnet. She was younger than he expected, no more than 35, but her skin held the pale stillness of someone who no longer feared judgment. A thin scar traced the edge of her jaw, faint but deliberate. "I'm Sarah May Lockridge," she said. John's hand moved toward his gun out of instinct. She held up a hand. "No need. I'm not Elijah's wife. Never was. I'm his mistake." John paused. "He used me," she said. "When I was 15, told my mother he'd pay for a roof over our heads if I worked at his estate. Work, he called it. For 3 years, I lived in that house. I watched men like Rayford laugh at pain. I saw them bury a rancher alive because he refused to sell. I tried to tell the sheriff. He sent me back." John said nothing. His hand dropped from his holster. Sarah stepped closer. "I knew your wife, Mary. She brought me bread once. Didn't know who I was. Just saw a girl crying behind the kitchen door. She gave me a roll and said, 'The world only stays warm if we keep passing the fire.'" A long silence stretched between them. "I remember that day," Sarah added, her voice breaking, "because it was the first time anyone was kind to me, and then they burned her." The rain softened. John met her gaze, the weight behind his eyes like a storm contained in glass. "I want to help," she said. John hesitated. "Why now?" "Because Elijah's not just a man with blood on his hands. He's building something worse. You think this ends with him? He's buying marshals, judges. There's a meeting coming in 2 days, East Ridge. He's gathering landowners to expand his reach, turn Dry Creek into something bigger, something that can't be stopped once it begins." John took this in, his silence folding around her words like a vow. "I can get you in," she continued. "I know the back routes. I know the men who watch the gates." He didn't trust easily, but he didn't hear lies in her voice. Sarah reached into her shawl and pulled out a medallion, Elijah's family seal, a key to every room in the estate. "He gave this to me," she said, "called it a reward. I kept it because I knew one day he'd pay for everything." John took it slowly, the brass cold in his hand. She wasn't done. "There's one more thing," she said. "He's keeping something hidden in the East Wing cellar. Not money, not guns, something worse." He raised a brow. She nodded. "Proof, letters, documents. He keeps blackmail on every man he's bought. You take him down, but leave that cellar standing. Someone else will take his place." John looked at the medallion again, then back at her. "I ride at dawn," he said, voice gravel and thunder. She didn't flinch. "Then I ride with you." They camped under the canopy of twisted pines, the rain finally easing to a whisper by midnight. Sarah didn't ask him questions. She didn't pry about his silence or the names on the leather. She just sat beside the fire and watched the sparks rise. At one point, she reached into her satchel and pulled out a small stitched cloth. "Made this for Mary," she said. "Never got to give it to her." John took it. It was a square of linen with a single word sewn in careful cursive: warmth. He stared at it for a long moment, then tucked it into his coat without a word. They didn't speak again that night. In the morning, as the first light hit the ridgeline, Sarah mounted her horse beside him. "Are you ready?" she asked. John adjusted his hat, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I'm not riding to end a man," he said quietly. "I'm riding to end a legacy." She nodded, and together they rode east, toward Elijah Lockridge, toward the reckoning, toward the end of silence. The path to the Lockridge estate was narrower than John remembered. Sarah led the way through the eastern trail, known to few outside the household. It curled around a series of rocky bluffs and through pine stands so thick they blocked out the morning sun. The air was still wet from the storm, and the mud clung to the horses' hooves like memory refusing to let go. John didn't speak. Sarah didn't either, but they didn't need to. What lay ahead required more than words. By noon, the estate's watchtowers were visible through the trees, dark shapes rising above the pines, crowned in iron and stained glass. The grounds bustled with riders and wagons as guests from all over the territory arrived for the meeting Elijah had orchestrated. Landowners, judges, a senator from the northern counties. They were dressed in polished boots and long coats, and their horses were marked with brands that symbolized wealth, not work. One by one, they passed through the front gates, nodding to guards with silver star badges, not from Dry Creek, but hired from outside. Lockridge had brought in his own order. John and Sarah waited on the ridge, cloaked in shade, watching like wolves, studying the gates of a slaughterhouse. Sarah dismounted and pointed to a drainage tunnel just beneath the foundation wall. "He keeps a false cellar behind the wine storage. There's a steel door. I know the combination." John nodded. They left the horses tethered in a small gully, hidden beneath branches. Then they slipped down the embankment and crawled through the narrow tunnel, their clothes slick with mud, their hands steady. The tunnel led to a crawl space beneath the estate's east wing, a place where rats once thrived and the air tasted of mildew and old secrets. The steel door was still there, covered by stacked crates and barrels. Sarah moved the cover carefully, her fingers shaking for the first time. "I never thought I'd come back here," she whispered. John didn't answer. He just placed a hand on her shoulder, brief, firm. She turned the lock. Click. The door groaned open. Inside, the air was colder than expected. Shelves lined the walls, filled with ledgers, sealed envelopes, legal contracts, and photographs, some grainy and faded, others recent and damning. John recognized faces, faces from town, faces of men who had shaken his hand at the harvest festival, who had nodded at him from church pews. Each document had a name, and next to each name, a price. Sheriff Doyle, $200 for silence. Pastor Abel, $80 for a false affidavit. Even the judge who had once fined John over a fence dispute, $500 to deny his appeal when Lockridge tried to seize his land. Sarah opened a second box. Inside were letters, dozens of them, threats, confessions, witness statements scribbled and signed, never submitted, a full network of fear woven through ink and greed. "This is how he owns people," she whispered. "This isn't just corruption. This is leverage, insurance." John pulled out one page with trembling fingers. It was from Mary, dated 4 days before the fire. It was addressed to a traveling magistrate in the capital. "If anything happens to me or my family, it will be by Elijah Lockridge's hand. Please protect this letter. My children deserve justice, if not in life, then in history." John closed his eyes. The weight of her words pressed into his chest like a second heart, beating not with blood, but with fire. Sarah moved to the oil lamp mounted on the wall. "I'll light it. You read." John opened another envelope. It contained a photograph of Ellie, taken secretly behind the schoolhouse. A note beneath it in Lockridge's handwriting. "Keep pressure. The boy is weaker. The girl's got too much of her mother." John's hands tightened. He stood slowly. "We burn it," he said. Sarah hesitated. "It's evidence. If we leave it with someone—" "There's no someone," he interrupted. "This town won't rise. It won't heal. Not while this exists. These papers are anchors. If we kill Elijah and leave this behind, another man will rise with these in his pocket." She looked at him long and hard, then nodded. "I'll get the kerosene." They worked in silence. Barrel by barrel, they soaked the floor. Every paper, every shelf. The flames would take it all, not to hide truth, but to free it, like fire cleansing a field before the planting season. As Sarah struck the match, John whispered a name. "Mary." then Ellie, then Thomas. One by one, like prayers. The match hit the floor. The fire rose fast. It ate the ledges with a hiss, then roared into the walls. Smoke rushed through the tunnel behind them, and they scrambled out through the drain just as flames broke the cellar window and reached into the sky. From the hill, they watched the east wing burn. Panic spread quickly. Men in suits ran in circles, shouting orders. Guns were drawn, horses reared. And in the center of it all, on the upper balcony, stood Elijah Lockridge, his eyes fixed on the rising smoke, his hands clenched into white fists. He turned and looked out into the pines, and there, beyond the trees, he saw it. A figure on horseback, black coat, wide-brimmed hat, and beside him, a woman in mourning. John Kessler didn't raise a weapon. He didn't need to. He just pointed, right at Elijah, a silent vow made in firelight, and then he turned and rode away. The end was coming, but vengeance had changed shape. This was no longer a man killing men. This was a fire coming for the heart of power. They rode through the night, no lanterns, no fire, just the sound of hooves cutting through the wet earth and the wind brushing through pines like whispers from the dead. John Kessler didn't speak. Sarah didn't ask him to. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full, humming with memory and fury, like the moments before a storm splits the sky. By dawn, the road turned to stone. Eastridge stood like a scar in the land, an outpost that had once been a mining checkpoint, now transformed by Elijah Lockridge into his final gathering place. The meeting had been moved there after the fire. The estate's east wing was gone, and rumors had begun to slither through the territory like snakes looking for cover. Some said Lockridge had gone mad, others claimed he'd found religion, but all agreed on one thing. Elijah had summoned every man he owned, judges, sheriffs, landowners, businessmen from across the southern territories. Some rode out of loyalty, others out of fear. They arrived one by one, their polished boots tracking mud across the floorboards of the outpost's hall, their eyes avoiding the burned flesh of the past week. Inside the main structure, a converted mill house, Elijah stood beneath a chandelier made of deer antlers, his hands gripping the edges of a map spread across a long oak table. His voice cut through the room like steel. "Dry Creek is no longer a place," he said. "It's a beginning, and beginnings require blood, pain, sacrifice. That man, Kessler, is a ghost. He will vanish when I say so." No one dared interrupt him, but a courier entered just then, breathless and pale. "Sir," the boy whispered, holding out a note. Elijah took it. He opened the folded parchment and read the words, written in tight script. "By the time you read this, I will be inside." He crushed the paper in his fist, face tightening like a drawn bow. John didn't come through the gates. He came from beneath. The drainage tunnel from the back of the hill still ran beneath the outpost, a relic from the old mining days. Sarah had found it marked on a map hidden beneath Lockridge's cellar before the fire. It ran cold and tight and dark as a grave, but it brought them directly beneath the foundation of the main hall. They emerged behind the kitchens, where steam hissed from iron pots and cooks moved like ghosts, unaware of the fire crawling toward them. John gave Sarah a look, a pause. "Don't come with me past here," he said. I need to finish this the way it began." She hesitated, but only for a second. Then she pressed something into his hand. It was the cloth she'd made for Mary. Warmth. John folded it and slid it into his coat pocket, just above his heart. Then he turned and walked into the lion's den. The main hall was filled with 40 men, all armed, all afraid. John's boots echoed as he stepped onto the wooden floor. The chandelier swayed overhead. The wind outside began to howl. Every head turned, every hand twitched toward a gun. But no one moved, because John Kessler didn't come in like a man looking for a fight. He came in like a man who already won. Elijah stood at the head of the table, frozen mid-sentence, one hand on a pistol holstered at his waist. John stopped 10 paces away. "Hello, Elijah," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. Lockridge smiled, a slow, sharp thing. "You've made a mess," he said. "All this drama, all this bleeding, for what? A house? A woman?" John didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out the strip of leather. 5 names, 4 crossed out, only 1 left. He let it fall to the table. The silence in the room bent like a blade under pressure. "You think you scare me?" Elijah laughed. "You think these men will let you shoot me? In front of them?" John's eyes didn't leave his. "I'm not here to shoot you," he said. That surprised everyone, even Elijah. "I'm here to let you live long enough to watch everything you built burn." Elijah's smile faltered. John reached into his other pocket, tossed a second object onto the table, the medallion, his seal, and beside it, the ledger, the second copy, not the one burned in the fire. Sarah had found it, hidden in the cellar wall, insurance. And now every man in the room stared down at the truth, names, amounts, crimes, signed and dated, and every man knew. If they shot John now, they'd be tying their own noose. "You'll die for this," Elijah said quietly. John took a slow step forward. "No," he replied, "you will." Then he turned his back and walked out. Not a single man stopped him, not even the ones who once called him a neighbor. Outside, the sky had turned black. Smoke rose on the horizon. The stables had caught fire. The ledger wasn't the only thing Sarah had planted. As men scrambled behind him, John mounted his horse. Sarah rode up beside him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You didn't kill him," she said. "No," John answered. "Not with bullets." She looked back at the building, men shouting, doors slamming, the storm rolling in. "Then how?" John's gaze stayed fixed on the burning sky. "By letting them see who he really is." They rode away as thunder cracked behind them. Each mile put the past further beneath their boots. John didn't look back, because the name was crossed, and the silence inside him was no longer empty. It was whole. The rains had passed. 3 days after the fire at East Ridge, the skies cleared, and the land beneath Dry Creek seemed to exhale for the first time in weeks. Ash clung to the trees like frost. The rivers ran black with soot, but the air, once thick with fear, was calm now, still, waiting. John Kessler didn't return to the town through the main road. He rode the old trail behind the mill where wild sage grew in thick tangles and the wind hummed low across the valley. His horse moved slowly, not from fatigue but from reverence, as though it too understood this ride was different. This was the last ride. Sarah had offered to come. She'd packed her saddle, stood ready at dawn. But he told her no. "There's something I need to do alone." She didn't argue. She just nodded and placed a small parcel in his hands. "For them," she said. "Not for you." Inside the parcel, a white linen ribbon, a lock of a child's hair tied in twine, and a slip of paper with a single word sewn in red thread. "Forgiven." He rode with it in his coat pocket, next to the square marked warmth. And as the rooftops of Dry Creek came into view, the memories returned like echoes down a canyon. Mary at the market laughing over a cracked jar of peach preserves. Thomas running with a wooden sword, shouting he'd defend the farm from bandits. Ellie sitting on the porch, drawing suns on the soles of her feet. He slowed his horse and stopped, right in the center of the town square. It was Sunday morning. People were already moving to the chapel, dressed in coats and hats, trying to pretend life had returned to normal. But when they saw him, everything stopped. The bell didn't ring, the doors stayed closed. He dismounted, tied his horse to the post like he used to when buying flour, then walked across the square, boots echoing off the wood planks of the boardwalk. The town was holding its breath. John stepped onto the steps of the chapel and turned. Not to run, not to threaten, but to speak. His voice cracked like a barn door, left too long in the wind. "I want you to hear this," he said. It was the first time many had heard him speak since the fire. Some had never heard him at all. "You watched. You looked away. You let a man buy your silence and bury my family with money instead of dirt. No one moved. No one breathed. "But I'm not here to punish you." He reached into his coat, pulled out the strip of leather. Only one name remained: Elijah. It was crossed out. He held it high, then set it on the steps. "I came with names. Now I leave them here." He turned and looked directly at Pastor Abel, who stood trembling near the chapel doors. Mary believed in grace. She left a letter, told the world who killed her, not to seek vengeance, but so the truth would stay alive. He paused, looked around at the faces, once so familiar, now older, smaller somehow. "I buried my family once. Then I buried the man I became after. And now I leave both here." He stepped down from the platform, walked past the saloon, past the blacksmith shop, past the general store where he'd once bought Ellie a blue ribbon, and he kept walking until the road opened to the plains again. Behind him, no one followed, no applause, no tears, just silence. The same silence he had ridden with, but now it wasn't the kind that crushed. It was the kind that released. 2 weeks later, the townsfolk awoke to find something new in the square. A small wooden cross planted where John had once stood, nailed to it the piece of leather. The names still visible: Silas, Hank, Jonas, Rayford, Elijah. Below them someone had carved 3 more: Mary, Thomas, Ellie. And under that, the words, "Justice is not vengeance, and silence is not peace. But sometimes one must walk through both to find the other." No one knew who carved it. Some said it was Sarah May. Others said it was the wind, finally ready to speak. As for John Kessler, no one saw him again. Some claimed he rode south into the desert to lose himself in sand and sun. Others believed he returned to the old battlefield where his scars first began. But those who knew, those who had watched a man burn, then rebuild himself from ash, believed something different, that he never left, that he became the silence in the trees at dusk, the shadow riding the ridge at dawn, the warmth in a stranger's kindness, and that sometimes late at night, when the wind passes just right through Dry Creek, you can hear 3 names whispered on the breeze: Mary, Thomas, Ellie. The last name had been crossed, but their story lived on, and the cowboy who carried it finally laid his burden down. Some wounds never truly heal, but sometimes, in the ashes of everything we've lost, a voice still rises, not in anger, but in truth. If this story touched you, share it. Leave a comment with the names that you carry, and if you want to ride with us through more stories of silence, justice, and redemption, subscribe to the channel. We'll be waiting on the trail.